In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to link our products with our database. So we did create some tables in the previous lesson. Moving forward, we're going to work primarily with our SQL myPHPAdmin, and then of course configure the functionality of our menu and create our brands, some feature products, and then configure the connection with our database, okay, using code. So let's begin. First, right now, our menu just consists of shirts, pants, shoes, and accessories. And of course, we still have our static products that we created using pure code. Now, when you have hundreds of products, you need to have a dynamic functionality with your SQL database, right? So it's difficult to add manually all these products. It's much easier if you make a connection to your database and simply add to the database, okay? So let me navigate to the myPHPAdmin. So currently within our Redstone Shop database, we have this products, and if I go to the structure of the products, you will see within this table structure the ID, title, price, list price, brand, image, and description. Next, we're going to add another column here within our products table. So for example, let's go ahead and add to this table another column. So I'm going to add one column here, and after, for example, let's say brand, and click go and give it a name. In this instance, the name is going to be categories. So it's categories, and this is going to be a varchar 255, and everything else stays the same. So simply click save, and this creates and updates the table products. So if I go back to my products, go to my structure, I'll have the categories column. I also want to make sure that I have the collation set for my categories, okay? Again, this helps in sorting and filtering. So let's click on change and select our collation to be UTF-8 Unicode CI, which is fine, and then click save. So I thought we didn't have this set, but it's set at this point. All right, next I'm going to create a new table called brand. So I'm going to click on new and give this basically an ID first, and then of course provide my table name as well. I'm going to call it brand, and the columns are going to be 1, and then of course give an ID to this, which is going to be a primary key. Of course I can choose the collation here as well if need be. I'm going to make it primary, click go, and then next I'm going to give this a brand name, and the length is going to be, or the type is varchar, length is 255 characters, and then simply click save. So here's my brand table and my products table. Next, I'm going to create a new table called categories, and I'm going to call this categories, and then specify certain fields within this table. Again, the ID, which is going to be an integer, and this is also going to be a primary key. Set my first key, and then my next field is going to be category, and this is going to be a varchar 255 is the length of this, and then the third field is going to be parent, and this is going to be an integer field, and then here I'm going to choose the default as defined, and I'm going to make it as a 0. So what we're essentially doing here is basically for the menu structure, we are defining or assigning the zeros for our parent category, and then we'll create some child categories that are going to populate that menu, okay? So here's the parent is defined as 0, and then once we're done, we'll simply click save, and this adds another table. So we have brand, categories, and then products. All right, so at this point, we've created a couple of tables. We've defined our categories and created our categories as well, and we have our products table. Next, let's go ahead and link our database with our site. So let's go back to our code. Here's our code. So we have our index.php. In order to link, obviously we need to create and specify the SQL syntax and use the SQL fetch and the DB commands to connect to our database. The easiest way, as I recall from earlier lessons, is to simply create the code and place it in one of the folders, and of course call the code within the index.php. This is much simpler, and I'm going to do the same. So simply right click on the tutorial, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it core, for instance, and within my core folder I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it init.php. Init file, or the initialization file that I'm going to create, will contain the code that is going to initialize the connection to the database. And of course I need to change my slash so that it follows the right path. Hit the enter key. And here's my blank init.php. So let's start with the PHP code. I'm going to start with my string db and start with my MySQLi underscore connect. And then I specify my local host. Okay, so the IP address is 127.0.0.1, and this is the IP for the local host regardless. Okay, of course I need to make sure my syntax correct here. And then comma. Next I'm going to specify the username, which in this instance is root by default, comma, and then my password, which is none at this point. So I'm going to leave the space blank within the two quotations. And then finally, the name of my database, which is Redstone Shop. Okay, so here's my initiation for the SQL connection. Once I'm done, simply use the semicolon. Let's go to the next line. So right now I've initiated the SQL connection to connect to this database using the localhost, root, blank password, and the name of the database. I'm also going to specify if there's an error, then we should do something, right? So for example, if my SQL underscore connect underscore error, and then use my curly braces and then print the message, right? So I'm going to say echo database connection failed with the following error. And then of course use my dot to concatenate, and then use MySQL I underscore connect underscore error. Get rid of this, and once I'm done, simply close it out. Okay, just recheck. Here's my connection to my local host. If MySQL I, this is what I need here, and it seems okay so far. So here's my initialization file. I'm going to save it. Let's test it out. Let's see whether this connection is successful or not. And obviously, when I refresh my main site and this doesn't work, then it's going to give me an error. So let's save it. Let's go to our site here, refresh, and there was no error, so it seems like our database is now linked. Okay, but we won't know until we actually create the products and then try to use the site to populate those products. Okay, so you have to bear with it for a little while and just to test and see. But if you don't see an error, that means you are connected. Okay, so here's our successful connection to our database. Now next we need to configure and also call this within our index.php, right? So this initialization file for the PHP, we need to make sure we have it on the top. So I'm going to say PHP and just use require once, and this is going to initialize, and then the path is core/init.php. Okay, so that's all I have to specify here. So let's save and make sure we still are connected and we're still good. All right, next let's go back to our my PHP admin and then in fact populate our categories. So once we do this, we are in fact going to have these menus populated with each of these categories. Okay, so let's navigate to PHP My Admin. Let's go to our categories here, and from within our categories, let's click on Insert, and let's insert our first category, which is men, and the parent ID is 0. I'm going to uncheck the ignore here because I'm going to add another category called women, and also the same 0. So this is our first, which is men 0, and then women 0. We click on go, and this creates the SQL for us and adds 2 rows. Okay, let's go back to categories. Now you'll notice the category men and women are created. Let's insert some more. Click on insert, and the category here is, let's say, boys and then girls, and both are 0. Uncheck the ignore. It should be in the description here. Perfect. Click on go, and likewise I'm going to create, just verify whether we have these within our categories, And let's insert a few more. So next category, for example, would be shirts. And in this instance, I'm going to give it a parent category 1, and then pants also 1. And the reason why I'm doing 1 and not 0 is because for my 0 categories, I have my men, women, boys, and girls. Okay, so these are my 4 categories for the IDs 0, and then the rest of the categories will fall in ID 1, 2, and so forth. So this way you can, in fact, structure your entire category structure for your products for the e-commerce site. So click go. And likewise, let's click on categories. Let me insert a couple of more. Let's go shoes. And I'm going to use this 1. And my next category will be accessories. And this will also be 1. Click go. All right, great. So you see how we're building these categories where parent categories are 0, IDs are 0, some are 1s, right? Let's create some additional with parent IDs as 2. Okay, so just click on insert. Let's go to our category description and type shirts. Give it 2 as the ID. And then pants, for example, I'm going to give this ID a 2 as well. Click OK. All right, great. So we're looking good so far. We're just adding these categories. Let's do one last one, for example, quickly. So I'm going to add some shoes here, and then dresses. And shoes is category 1, or shoes is category 2, and dresses is also 2. And then click go. All right, so here are my final categories. Do I want more? Maybe another one would be nice. Click on description. So here I'm going to quickly write shirts, for example, and then place them into an ID 3. And then pants also use ID as 2. Okay, or rather keep them the same. So they fall into the same category. Click go. And here's the list of our various categories. All right, let's finish this off by creating one last one. I'm going to call it dresses. And this is going to be a category ID 4. And then I'm going to place these shoes into ID 4 as well. Click go. All right, great. So we have our categories created at this point. So once we have these categories created in our database, we need to go back to our site and link these categories using SQL. So let's go to our code here. And within our navigation bar, because that's where we want these, right after the body tag. Okay, so this is where we will actually write the SQL statement, which will link all these categories and display them within our nav bar. So let's do a script, PHP, and then do SQL, string SQL equals, and this is going to be my SQL query, right? So it's select, simple select statement. Let me place this in the right syntax. So I'm going to select everything from the categories table, put a condition where parent ID is basically 0, right? So here's my first query, in fact, for my SQL. Next, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to store these values there. So this will be pQuery, for example, and use my DB connection for my SQL query, and then use my string SQL. Close the parentheses. So once again, simply running a simple query from our database, right? So it's going to pull all the categories where parent ID equals 0 from our myphpAdmin database, the connection which we already made earlier, right, to the database. And this will in fact show us whether our connection was successful or not. All right, next, under the navbar, UL class navbar, we need to enter and call PHP here as well. So do PHP and do a while parent equals pQuery. This is our variable. Specify the MySQLi connection, but we're not really making a connection here, right? We're actually fetching information. So we'll use the SQL fetch, do the fetch a sock, and close the parentheses. All right, so we have the PHP while parent equals pQuery, and then use the SQL fetch. But let me do this in fact. Let me switch. Let me use the pQuery here, okay? Because I want to have them fetch the variable here and get rid of this. All right, this looks better. So once we have this, our PHP tag ends, and simply close our PHP tag. All right, so let's start another PHP here. And this time I'm going to specify the parent string here. ID equals my parent ID from the array, okay? And use the semicolon. Next, use SQL again. And this time I'm going to create a new variable, SQL2, to store those, in other words, for the child categories. So SQL2 variable will contain my another select statement. So I'm going to say select everything from categories where parent equals parent ID. Of course, forgot my string sign here. And then give it a space. And let's go to our next line here. Make sure I have my semicolon after the quotations. Let's go to the next line. Let's do string cquery here, another variable. And here I'm going to use the string db and simply specify the name of the query as my SQL2. SQL2 here with the string. Close it with a semicolon. All right, so our navbar has now an SQL statement. Let's go down. Let's go down to our drop-down menus now and configure our drop-down menus with our database. Okay, so in order to configure our drop-downs, so here's our link to the drop-down toggle, right? So the text ID equals men. Instead of the static men, I'm going to use the PHP tag here and simply print the parent category. Okay, so this array is going to be found from our database. So instead of the static word men, we're telling it to go to our database, fetch this category, and display. And then, of course, finish it off with a semicolon. All right, let's go down here to our and click on the menu and add PHP here for the child categories. We need those as well, because otherwise the list will not be populated. Okay, so let's do a while child equals my SQLi fetch, and then do the cquery variable, rather do a colon here. Go to the next line. Back here, let's go to our list items, right? So our list contains shirts, pants, shoes, and accessories. But we don't need, let's say, these because we're going to bring them directly from the database. So we're going to get rid of this. And instead of the shirt, just do a PHP here. And simply do a print or an echo of child categories from the category table. Okay, great. And then once I'm done with my list, and do an end while here, and then finish it off with another end while for after the list as well. All right, great. We have enough code. Let's test it out and see how it all works. Let me save this. Let's test our code here, whether our menus are populated from our database. So let's go to our site. Let's refresh. And awesome. So we have our men menu, which has shirts, pants, shoes, and accessories. We have our women, shirts, pants, shoes, and dresses. And this is good because we know exactly that now it's pulling from the right categories. And then we have our boys, shirts and pants, and then of course girls, dresses and shoes. So now our menu categories of these products are dynamic, right? They're coming directly from our database. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to in fact use our products dynamically as well. Okay, so not just static products, but use them dynamically from our database. Okay, so I just wanted to show you in this lesson how to configure the database connection, how to create additional tables within our database using SQL, and then eventually connect these categories. So I hope this helps practice, and let's move to our next lesson.